Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Resources for Childcare Programs Impacted by COVID-19. Before we get started, I would like to go a few items to participate in today's event. You should see your GoToWebinar control panel in the upper right-hand corner of your computer screen. You have joined today's presentation, and you have selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. The webinar is being recorded. All participants are placed on mute for quality assurance. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A sessions throughout and at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to turn things over to Kathy Glazer, BECF President.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We are really pleased to have so many childcare providers on the line today, especially those that are in nonprofit and faith-based organizations. We also have a number of stakeholders on the call today who join us in recognizing how important and valuable you and your services are, and we're committed to supporting you. Over the next hour and a half, you'll be hearing a great deal of information that we hope will help you and support you as you make decisions, really difficult decisions, and choose actions to take in this really challenging environment of COVID-19. I do want to, before we get started, want to refer you to the handout that is in the handout box on your control panel. It would be helpful if you can open that up and refer to it as we move through the program today. So the agenda is on your screen, and I'm going to give you a sense of who you'll be hearing from as we move through these different sections. First, we'll be hearing from Jenna Conway, who's Virginia's Chief School Readiness Officer. Next, Jody Keenan, who is the Virginia Director of the Small Business Development Centers. Grace Reef with Early Learning Policy Group. Lauren Small, who is with Early Education Business Consultants. And Gary Thompson, who is Chairman of the Virginia Society of CPAs and Chair of Virginia's School Readiness Committee. Also, waiting in the wings to be helpful are national experts Kelly Etter with Policy Equity Group and Becca Ulrich with the Center for Law and Social Policy, and they will be on hand to answer your questions or address some of the questions that you type in the question box. I want to thank all of our terrific presenters who've been really hard at work to make sure that the information that they're providing is as clear and useful as possible. So with that, we'll get started, and I will welcome Jenna Conway.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Wanted to sort of echo the appreciation that Kathy expressed on behalf of the administration, the Department of Social Services, and Department of Education for all that you have done and all that you have been doing over the course of the last few weeks in response to this pandemic. What I'd like to do is talk about what we know, talk about kind of how essential childcare is to the Commonwealth during this period, and talk about what we're working on in terms of our priorities. Not sure if there's the next slide here, Kathy. Yep. Thank you. So this and I know this is a rapidly moving situation and sort of constantly evolving, but want to kind of give you a sense of what we know right now about what's happening in the Commonwealth. So we've been working very closely, Department of Social Services in partnership with Child Care Aware of Virginia, to kind of keep track of who's opened, who's closed, really since the governor's executive order requiring all schools to be closed, all public and private K-12 schools to be closed. Right now, what we know right now is that about 62% of our child day centers are closed across the Commonwealth. So again, more of you are closed than are open as it relates. We know that nearly half of our religious exempt preschools are closed, and we know that our family day homes, only about 1 in 5 are closed. So far few of those, more of those, for example, are able to remain open, often because of their smaller settings. Altogether, roughly across the state, there are about 2,400 childcare programs that are closed temporarily. This represents a loss in capacity of about 200,000 kids. So a pretty significant number of slots, I should say slots, not kids, sort of slots in terms of licensed capacity across the state. So I say that to really emphasize 2 points. I think the first of which, for those that you have to close, so that you're not alone in terms of the struggle that you're going through. We know these have been incredibly difficult times as small business owners, as nonprofits, as sort of faith-based programs, in terms of trying to make that decision based on what your educators need, your families need, and what your kids need. If you're still open, we applaud you and thank you for standing up and sort of, and stepping up and kind of continuing to serve families during this incredibly challenging time. I know that there has been some misinformation about, is childcare essential? What does the governor's stay-at-home order mean? And wanted to emphasize, and I know that some of you have been able to hear him speak, he said this directly, but childcare is allowed to be open even with the stay-at-home order, and even with all of the public and private schools closed, and childcare educators are, for these purposes, essential personnel. And so really want to emphasize, for those that you have remained open, we are deeply appreciative of you standing up, stepping up, and remaining open. We consider your educators to be essential, and we have, what we have asked you to do, and joint guidance from the Department of Education and Social Services is to focus and prioritize other essential personnel, our health and hospital employees, our first responders, and then those other essential workers who enable society to function. And again, this goes beyond just health and hospitals and first responders, those we traditionally think of, and really thinking about those folks who make our food supply chain work, whether that's the takeout at the restaurant or the grocery store employees, whether it's at Walmart or Target, those folks who are getting kind of, key supplies to families, whether that's, the folks who work at the gas station or keep our power utilities functioning, our government employees, if you happen to be in Northern Virginia or in the capital area, it's that broad definition of that third category of essential workers who are asking to kind of be the priority, knowing that, as I just indicated earlier, that we've already lost about 200,000 slots in capacity. And there's more guidance on the social services and ed website on sort of how to think about defining essential workers. We know that the message hasn't gotten out there fully that you're allowed to be open. And so one of the things that we'll be putting on our website, if not today, but by the end of the week, is a letter for the field from Commissioner Storin and Superintendent Lane that indicates that you are allowed to be open, that you are essential, and also asking you to be kind of a priority for critical supplies locally. We have heard in some cases that folks have showed up and told you can't be open, or that you're having trouble getting kind of cleaning supplies and other materials. Obviously, a lot of those decisions are kind of being made by sort of stores and folks locally, and so we have produced a letter that you can print. You can put your sort of the name of your site and your license number if you are licensed, the kind of information about that at the bottom of that letter, and you can then take that if you need to your Kroger or to your Walmart, and hopefully it can help you, can enable you to get some of those supplies. But at least should demonstrate that you are essential, because we know, even though the governor has said that, even though that has been indicated in guidance coming from the state, that doesn't mean that word has gotten out to all of the 130 plus communities across the Commonwealth. So, and then lastly, what are we working on now? And we know you've got a lot coming at you, and I'm only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the webinar and all the detail, but want you to know that there's 2 things that we are focused on in terms of the governor's administration, the Department of Social Services, and Department of Education. I think the first of which is working with communities across the state to make sure there's enough emergency childcare. There are different models out there. Some show us peaking later in April, some show us peaking in May, but really wanting to make sure that we have enough capacity so that our health and hospital system can continue to function, our society can continue to function for the next 4 to 6 weeks, depending on when the peak of this crisis is. And so really working in a public-private way with you all, our providers, with our municipal governments, our local governments, with school systems, with Smart Beginnings, with United Ways, other groups across the state, to make sure that we have plans in case there's not enough capacity in the private sector over the course of the next, month to 2 months to sort of support, our essential workers. Our second priority is looking at, in very sort of short order, how do we use the $66 million that's part of the CARES Act? This is sometimes referred to as this, the COVID stimulus, but there was $66 million that goes straight to the Commonwealth that go into the Child Care and Development Block Grant that is explicitly dedicated for child care. Can be used to help support emergency child care, can be used to support providers that stay open during this period of time and are serving essential workers, can be used to support programs on our child care subsidy program, can be used to support families in terms of addressing some of the kind of expenses they're having, like things like copays. So we are looking at that right now. We expect that these dollars will be available any day now. So again, this was approved by Congress and signed by the president about 10 days ago. We are hoping to have it available and hoping to make an announcement on how we will get those dollars out to the field, and really focused on kind of hearing what we've heard from you in terms of the needs. So I'll sort of reiterate those. I think part of that is supporting the potential costs of emergency childcare. A part of that is supporting the providers that are remaining open. I think part of that potentially would be supporting those providers who take subsidy, whether open or closed, and then looking at our families on subsidy and what supports they might need. So those are the kind of the areas that we're looking at right now, but we are hoping to have an announcement within the week, if not, beginning of next week, on how we will use those dollars to support the emergency support child care sector in Virginia. All 66 of those $1 million will go towards supporting the sort of broader child care sector. So these are not, there's a lot of other dollars out there we'll talk about in some of the unemployment and other things today, but this is a dedicated resource for the child care sector in the Commonwealth. And we are working as we speak to determine how we'll use that. One thing to note before opening up for questions, $66 million is a lot of money. We are committed as a state to getting that out to the field as quickly as possible in a fair and equitable way that meets folks' needs. And are very excited that our federal partners have put toward that money. I should note, though, if you look at that number and you look at kind of the loss in capacity and what that means at the top of this slide, it will not solve the problem. The $66 million, no matter how we slice or dice it, and I'm not sort of shirking our responsibility for doing that thoughtfully, but no matter how we slice and dice that, won't solve the extent of the hurt that you all have experienced over the course of the last month. And so I just say that's really important as we kind of think about going forward, and we will announce how we'll use that. That will help address some of the pain that folks have felt, but the pain and the hurt in which you all have experienced over the last month will far exceed that. And so we'll continue to be advocacy for additional stimulus dollars and other resources, but note that part of why we're so glad to partner with the ECF and the national experts you're going to hear from today is we realize, and just want to be very direct with you, that these dollars won't solve the kind of extent of the sort of hurt and the financial pain experienced by the sector since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, Kathy and Sam, want me to open it up and see if there's any kind of immediate questions. I can also look at the chat box here.
Thanks, Jenna. A couple of questions. One is hopefully quick and easy to answer. You mentioned a letter that childcare providers can have to show that they're essential workers and to be able to get the supplies. Can you tell us where that letter can be found?
So yes, it was finalized yesterday afternoon, and so we will hope to get it up on kind of the DOE and the DSS COVID microsite, ideally by the end of the day today. So probably not up yet, but should go out, and then we'll use the DSS listservs to get it out to folks too. But to look for that, by the end of the day today on the DSS and DOE websites.
Thank you. And then just one more question for you, Jenna. With the resources that you mentioned as part of the stimulus, will any of those funds be available for religious exempt programs?
what we have heard, and I can't make any commitments at this point in time, as there's a process by which the administration makes these decisions, but we have heard, and as I noted before, and the reason I include it here is that some of our faith-based programs are operational, are serving essential personnel, and are playing a key role in providing kind of emergency childcare during this period. And so that is one of the needs that we've identified. So, I mean, generally speaking, a lot of the dollars that go into this, kind of fund those programs that take subsidy, the feds did provide us with permission to go beyond the programs that take subsidy and look at those that are remaining open and might have a need. And so we are considering that. So we are considering, Kathy, the faith-based programs. We will let you know more as soon as the decision is finalized, but we have heard that the faith-based programs that are open are in need, and we are considering them in terms of the broader need and how we can use this $66 million to address some of that need.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate that and appreciate how hard you're working to help get those decisions made. I think now we are going to turn to Jody Keenan and hear about some of the relief that's available through the stimulus.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to participate in this webinar. I hope that we can provide you some direction on what financial resources might be available for you to consider to help you keep operations going and keep employees employed. I am, as I was introduced, I'm the director of the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network, or the SBDC, and we are a program that provides business advising and training to small companies and organizations. So in this circumstance, we are absolutely working with nonprofit organizations like yourselves to help you through these financial programs. So I'll encourage you, if you can go to the next slide, please. Great. I'll encourage you to check out our website, virginiasbdc.org, to find a local office near you. We have a network of 27 SBDCs around the Commonwealth. We serve every city and county and town. We are operating, we're all working remotely, so we're handling requests for assistance by phone and email, and we're doing webinars just like this for one-on-one advising. So we can certainly walk you through these applications in a little bit more detail once you reach out to us. And the website for the SBA that's on the screen is a link to all of the disaster funding programs information and goes into more detail than what we'll provide for you this afternoon. Next slide, please. Okay, this gives you a visual comparison of the three principal financing vehicles that were included in the new stimulus package. So I'm going to go through them briefly and kind of touch on the key points, but this document will be included in the handout materials that you receive after the webinar as well. The first two, the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Advance, those programs or those funds are delivered directly from the SBA. So you as an organization will go online to the SBA webpage and complete an online application for both of these, which is not typical, but I want to point out that these funds come directly from the SBA. Faith-based organizations and 501c3 organizations are eligible to apply for all of these programs. That communication was clarified the end of last week. So we're encouraging organizations like yourselves to look at these and to apply for the resources. The EIDL is used basically for working capital expenses, payroll, rent, utilities, interest on debt, accounts payable. You can apply for up to $2 million. It is based on the average of 6 months worth of expenses from the previous year. So there's a cap there according to that formula. For loans up to $25,000, there's no guarantee, or excuse me, no collateral. There's no guarantees for these loans or personal guarantees. And of course, if you're running a faith-based nonprofit organization, child care center, you are likely, the application will ask you for ownership information, and we're advising that you indicate NA hyphen nonprofit. They may ask you for who is the principal party or the principal person in the organization, and that may be you, or it may be the chairperson of your board, but that information is asked so they have someone in the organization to follow up with. I'll make the caveat that while nonprofits and faith-based organizations are eligible for these funds, this is the first time that's happened. So all of the forms really speak to a business and not necessarily a nonprofit. So you may have to wrap your brain around that a little bit. And I encourage you to be patient with it. The interest rate for the EIDL loan for nonprofits is actually 2.75%. So it's a point less than for a for-profit company. And the term is out to 30 years. But the piece of the EIDL that most folks are interested in initially is this advance, the EIDL advance, which is up to $10,000 and has been very confusing in the past couple of days as to what does up to $10,000 really mean and equate to. The recent direction we've seen from SBA is that you'll be eligible for an advance of $1,000 per FTE. So if you have 10 or more FTEs, you'd get the advance up to 10,000. Anything less than that, 4 employees, you get $4,000. This money gets distributed right into your bank account when you you apply for, you request the advance as you are applying for the EIDL loan. So you go online to SBA, you complete the EIDL loan application, and the last question in that application says, I'm requesting the advance. You check that box, you provide your bank routing information and bank account number before you go ahead and submit to SBA. The disbursement of these funds was intended to happen within 3 days of application, and then it was intended, we thought, to be 3 days of when it was processed. I can tell you, I don't know of anyone who has gotten the advance yet, so that 3-day time frame is squishy at best. So, but I would encourage you nevertheless to apply for these funds and get yourself in the queue or in the line, because there's a high demand for these dollars. And we want to make sure that organizations like yours are considered and in that pipeline. In addition to the EIDL program is the PPP, or the P3, the Paycheck Protection Program. And the intent of this particular loan is to help you keep your employees on your payroll and also to help you keep some operations going, all right? With this loan program, you apply to a lender, to an SBA approved bank. We're recommending that you start first with the bank that you have a current relationship with, a business relationship. You have your checking account, you have your, maybe you've gotten a business credit card, or you've gotten another organizational loan through that lender. So start with your current lender. If that bank or lender is not an SBA approved lender at this point, then you need to find another lender and go with an approved lender. 2 caveats. One is the SBA is casting a wide net and trying to onboard and get as many approved lenders in their system as possible, so that these funds can be as accessible to the wider audience as reasonably possible. The second caveat is that at this point, we're understanding that most, not all, but most banks are prioritizing current customers for these PPP loans. Some are not even entertaining applications from non-customers. Others may just be prioritizing, like I said, current customers. There are some lenders who will look at it, will review and consider an SBA, or excuse me, a PPP application if you don't have a lending relationship with them. One in Virginia right now, I think it's the only one that I'm aware of today, is Virginia Community Capital. They're a community development financial institution based in Richmond with offices around the state. So I would encourage you to take a look at Virginia Community Capital if you don't already have a relationship with an established SBA lender. Okay. So the way they determine how much you can borrow through this is they take a look at 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs. They cap the salary per employee at $100,000. So it's up to $100,000 of salary or wages per employee. That does not include the additional fringe expenses that might be included in there. The intent, again, of this funding is to be used towards payroll. So they want 75%. If 75% of your loan proceeds is used for payroll during an 8-week period, which we'll talk about in a minute, then you're eligible to have the whole loan forgiven. You are also eligible, though, to use the funds for interest on mortgage payments if you have a building that you own, your organization owns, or rent and utilities. There's no collateral required for this loan. Again, no personal guarantee, which typically doesn't apply to a 501c3 like yourself, but the application may ask for a personal contact information so they have someone to follow up with as they go through the process. You don't need on any of these programs to demonstrate that you've got access to credit in another place or another area, and you can, as we talked about, or as I've alluded to, you can get this loan 100% forgiven, provided that you keep staff and compensation levels, that you maintain staffing and compensation levels for an 8-week period of time. And that 8 weeks starts from the day that you get the loan, that you sign the loan documents. And as I said, 75% of the loan should be spent towards payroll. If that's the case, then 100% of that loan is forgiven. If a portion is not forgiven, the interest rate is 1%, so it's almost free. And the term to repay that is 2 years, and there's no prepayment penalty. I know I went through that quickly, but there's a lot of information around these programs here and in other places. And of course, you can always call us and meet one-on-one. Let's go to the next slide quickly. I want to keep track of my time here. There are also provisions in the CARES Act for credits on payroll taxes. So if your operation, including a nonprofit, were if the activity of your operation was impacted by COVID-19, which most of you will be able to say yes, for sure. If there's a decline in gross receipts by more than 50%, you can apply, in a quarter, you can apply for these tax credits. I will advise you that to be careful on using tax credits. You can't combine the tax credit with some of the loan programs that would reimburse you for those expenses, okay? So you're not double dipping on any of these programs. You can apply for an EIDL loan and a PPP, so you can have 2 loans. They just can't be used for the same purpose. So, and it's the same with tax provisions and credits and deferments of payroll taxes and whatnot. You can't defer payroll taxes, but also get reimbursed for those, all right? So I caution you on that, but it's not complicated once you kind of wrap your brain around it, and we and some of your even organizational advisors, your accountant, for instance, can help you navigate that. The next slide, please. That might be the end of my slides. A couple of things around managing expectations. You know, the system has never processed this much money before in such a short period of time. So that's creating backlogs and log jams. And so I encourage you to be patient and manage the expectations. As a previous presenter mentioned, Jenna, I think, she said, hey, look, these monies are not going to make you whole. And they're probably not going to come as quickly as you need them and like them to come. So have some alternatives in mind as well. I mentioned that they've opened up now for faith-based organizations, and I already talked with you a little bit about the criteria on the PPP applications. I will say that the lenders are building their systems at the same time, or maybe a step ahead of the SBA and Treasury coming out with full guidance. So sometimes the system seems clunky and you might apply today, and next week they'll ask you for additional information as guidance becomes more clear. So we're all in that same boat. So I just encourage you to be cautious or patient there, and then beware of scams. Just there's a ton of scams out there around all kinds of money coming out. Don't be giving out your phone number, your account number information on the phone to someone who pretends to be SBA or the IRS. You don't have to pay any fees to apply for these applications or these loans. So work with your accountant or come in and visit an SBDC or a women's business center or a SCORE chapter to help you with these applications. You don't need to pay, and there are no fees applied for these loans either. So again, it's intended to be user-friendly, although I appreciate that it doesn't always seem like it's user-friendly. Okay, I think that's probably my last slide, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that might have come up at this point.
Thank you, Jody. It looks like folks have had questions along the way, but our ACE team has been able to provide answers to most of the questions. We'll see a few others coming forward, but I think what we'll do is, it seems that as information comes forward, it sort of naturally answers some of the questions that are being raised. So I think we'll move on now to Grace and hear about unemployment, and then we can always circle back around and call out some of these questions. Thanks,
All right.
Jody.
Thank you.
Sure. Kathy or Sam, do you want to go to the next page? Hi, everybody. Great. So super quick overview on the food program. It's officially called the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Some of you may participate, some may not. Big picture, it's used to reimburse snacks and meals for low-income children. Some of you may be open, some of you may be closed. Here's the thing to think about. Congress understood that there's a widespread impact, obviously, of COVID-19. And with all the schools closed throughout the country and a number of childcare programs closed, legislation was passed to provide really pretty big waiver authority. And the idea is some of these children depended on school lunch or breakfast or the food program for childcare to eat. And so what we're trying to encourage is open or closed, that people understand, those who are operating programs, come up with creative ways to make sure that the families you serve in your community can continue to have access to food. So technically, they waived something called non-congregate feeding. And what that is you have to, in general, be fed on site. And now the waiver says, hey, you can do meals to go, you can do grab and go, which means, parent may pick up a lunch or, food. And so we just encourage you at the local level to, if you are using this program, to think creatively to make sure that families with children have access to meals and snacks. Last on this, there's also flexibility on the meal patterns. It's a federal program, so of course it has, lots of rules on the meal pattern. do your best. We all know you go to the grocery store, there's lots of products that are no longer available. The shelves are wiped clean, depending on the time of day you go or what your community receives in shipments that day or week. So don't worry about the meal program guidelines that are usually in place. Just do your best with the concept of we want children to have access to food in a nutritious manner. Probably there could be a whole webinar on this. So what I'll point you to is a really great webinar that FRAC, the Food Research and Action Center, did. It's about 45 minutes long. If you are participating in the food program, you might want to click on that webinar and get some ideas and see what you can do to make sure that families with young children have access to food and snacks. The Department of Agriculture also has a COVID-19 resource page, and that might be something as well. So Sam, can you go to the next slide? Great. So unemployment. Here's what we know. Unemployment is pretty much skyrocketing throughout the country. Congress recognized that and put in place some emergency assistance. So typically, there were some people like the self-employed or people who work in a faith-based organization who might previously have been ineligible for state unemployment programs. And what Congress has done is said, hey, in these emergency times, we've got to create a broader safety net. So there's now a new federal program. It's called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, and it's really designed to catch those people who otherwise might have been excluded from a state program. You can get full or partial benefits depending on your situation. Some people might have been, laid off or furloughed. It's not really worth it to try and, Google, well, what's the difference between laid off and furloughed? Here's the concept to go with. If your job's been impacted by COVID-19, you are eligible. So if your hours have been reduced, let's say you used to work 40 hours a week, and now to make the center viable with lower enrollment, you're working 32 hours a week, you can also qualify for partial benefits. So that's important to understand. In addition, because states have different rules on what their minimum and maximum unemployment benefits are, Congress stepped in and said, hey, we're going to just throughout the nation have a weekly supplement of $600 that comes on top of either your state unemployment compensation or this new federal pandemic unemployment. And so that's only for a temporary period. That extra $600 weekly only goes through July 31st. But it's important to understand, let's say you were in a partial situation and you didn't get much, but you got a little bit in unemployment, you still, by the fact that you got some unemployment benefits, state or federal, trigger onto this immediate weekly extra $600 through this temporary period, July 31st. I think some of you might be employees of a nonprofit, but others might actually be directors or owners. So here's something to keep in mind. Regular people just know that they get an unemployment check, but the people who actually operate the nonprofit know that behind the receipt of unemployment, some nonprofits are in a self-funded situation, which is also called a reimbursable arrangement. And what that means is, in general, there's an employer tax that's paid, and that helps to fund the state unemployment program. And so instead, some nonprofits say, well, instead of paying a per person tax, we're going to kind of roll the dice and reimburse. Maybe, historically we haven't laid people off, so rather than pay a tax per person, we're instead going to self-fund. So with this widespread impact, what the federal government is doing is they're going to pay 50% of the cost. So if you're a nonprofit employer and you're self-funded or you have a reimbursable arrangement, know that the unemployment financial aspect for you is that you will pay 50% of the benefits compared to under the old law, where you would have been responsible for 100% because you chose to be self-funded. On employers, another question that I know that I've gotten is, well, there's an experience rating. And what that means is if you're an employer, if you in the past have laid off a bunch of people, you're probably paying a higher state tax, which helps fund the unemployment program. If you had very few or none, you probably have a much lower state tax rate. That's called an experience rating. So in this time of public health emergency, where there are programs that are closing and there are programs that are, reducing hours for people, states now have a new waiver authority where they can say, hey, we know through no fault of your own this is going on, and we may waive the experience rating. So in that tax situation, you're not going to be penalized. So that is out there. Just if you happen to be an employer on the call, understand that. Next slide. Okay, so big question is, okay, you're giving us a lot of information, so where do I apply? So I want to let you know that you can apply in English or Spanish, and that's at the Virginia Employment Commission website. It's really designed to be a one-stop shop, so it doesn't really matter if you come in through the gateway of the state unemployment program, or if you're not eligible and now you're going to receive the new federal emergency assistance. States are urged to do this in the most seamless way possible, in kind of a one-stop fashion, so there aren't multiple federal multiple forms to fill out, and the goal is to really make it easy. Having said that, this is a work in progress. The Virginia Employment Commission is currently working at it. We fully expect the new rules are going to be up soon. They're not up yet. So if you qualify for the regular state unemployment program, you can go ahead and apply online. But if you typically are excluded from that regular state program, state employees are working as fast as they can, often remotely, mostly remotely, to make this all work. So my advice to you is to check the site regularly and see if that new federal program is up. What's up there now on the site is, hey, Virginia is working on this. We want to get this in place as soon as possible. So know that. So that's a good thing. How much are benefits? That's kind of a key question. Benefits are based on earnings. However, what's important to know is that everyone who receives either state unemployment or the new federal unemployment assistance will get that $600 weekly supplement through July 31st. It's temporary, but it's really intended to say, hey, we know this is a public health emergency now, and we want to supplement typically what are low state benefits because they're set low so that people have an incentive to look for work and get a job. The federal government decided, we want to supplement these so people stay home. That stay at home is super important so that we can reduce community spread. Partial payments, as I mentioned before, are based on income loss. Let's say your hours were down. The Virginia Employment Commission is trying to work all this out so that they can get people whole as much as possible. Another question I know I've received, so I just thought I would flag it, is that unemployment, when you apply, you can indicate how you want to receive your compensation. So you might be able to get it through a debit card, direct deposit, or a check. What I would urge you to think about if you are applying is check off debit card or direct deposit if that's at all possible. This check business, particularly as everybody is working remotely, will be super complicated and probably slower to issue checks. Not impossible, but probably slower. So if at all possible and you can use a debit card or a direct deposit, that would be great. You probably want to get that information, for example, on direct deposit. Get your bank information available as you fill out that application so you're not fumbling for it while you're online filling out the web form. Unemployment is income. So even though it might be less than what you were earning, it still is income and it's taxable. You may be able to opt to have taxes withheld. that might be an individual decision based on what's best for you at the moment. And last, unemployment compensation, whether it's the state program or whether it's the new federal assistance, undocumented individuals are not eligible. You must be eligible to work lawfully in this country to receive assistance, and that is through state and federal laws. So I will just flag that. So with that, my slides are done. I wasn't looking through the questions to see if there's anything that's a major flag, but if so, I'm glad to answer.
Thank you, Grace. Looking to see if there are any questions that haven't been answered. That I know a few questions have been coming forward about what is the definition or how do you define full-time? And I don't know if any one of our speakers wants to try to address that question.
Kathy, I can just tell you what it says in the Act. It says that full-time is based on a 30-hour per week equivalent. A couple of people have asked about if they're a part-time or less than full-time daycare, how would that be calculated? I think we're going to need to dig into the details of that, but the Act as it is defined right now equates a full-time equivalent as someone who works an average of 30 hours per week per year.
That's helpful. Thank you, Gary. Here's another question. Do you know if people who are in the process of getting a green card will this benefit affect them? Will this be considered public assistance?
You know, that's a good question. I'm glad to look into that and get back to you. I don't want to give any misinformation.
This is Becca jumping in. Becca from the Center for Law and Social Policy. No, unemployment insurance is not considered a public benefit for the purposes of public charge.
The other thing that I would just add is, and everybody, I think it's important to have patience and understand, even though that's difficult. Congress passed 3 major bills in the last 10 days with super complicated provisions across the board, whether it's unemployment or SBA or paid leave and other things. And the federal agency staff are working remotely and trying to write rules for these things, you know, as fast as they can. And the fact that anything's come out at all is really amazing and a testament to how hard people are working, even under these emergency circumstances. And many of the state agency staff, they have to wait for that federal guidance to come out before they can put together what it looks like in the state. So I do urge you to think through, as much as you might be frustrated in applying for some of these things, to have a little bit of patience, that these are extraordinary times and that federal agency staff are working hard remotely as fast as they can, and state staff are working hard remotely as fast as they can, and there is an interaction between the two. States can't assume things, they have to wait for federal guidance. So we are glad to answer any questions, but know that all of the information is kind of evolving and you get a little bit more every day, but which is better than having to wait several weeks to get anything, but it is an evolving rule situation.
Thank you, Grace. Appreciate all the good information. And yes, all of this is evolving. And so even though we don't have all of the answers, we are hoping to run them down and keep watching for them. Also, just want folks to know that your very good questions that are coming through are going to be informing a frequently asked questions document. So keep them coming and we will try to make sure that we can address them in time as soon as the answers are available. Grace, thank you. I think at this time we're going to move on to Lauren Small and hear her information, and then we'll get back to answering questions. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. My role in the presentation today is to help you think strategically. We've just heard a ton of information. Some of it's very technical, and you may be feeling a little bit maybe overwhelmed and just wondering, how do you figure out a way forward that's best for your program, but also good for your families and, of course, your wonderful staff. We know how vital and critical our nonprofit and faith-based programs are to our larger early care and education system. You're mission-driven, but you're still businesses. And businesses that have to, in order to stay viable, have enough revenue, enough tuition, enough money coming in to cover expenses. And so it's requiring all of you, your directors and your leadership team, your boards, to really put on business hats and take this very technical information and quickly make some decisions that could make the difference in your viability. So first of all, you know, as we, oh, and I see a typo there, I apologize. But first of all, as we start to think about what to do, we have to take a moment to be calm and smart and strategic and put on our business hats. Our goal with this presentation and all the work that we're doing is that we as an early care and education system come through this on the other side, still in business, ready to educate and care for young children, and that we have a team of staff ready, employed to do work. Kathy, next slide, please. Kathy mentioned the guide that was developed, and this is an incredible tool that I think you'll find very useful. And it's designed to take this information that was shared with you today and break it into a few chunks to help you make some decisions. I think it would be very safe to say that every program out there has a different set of variables, and there is no one size that fits all shoes with what's going on with COVID-19. So the first part of it, and it's broken into 3 sections, is the knowledge guide, which briefly, well, I would even say in depth, describes these different programs and the information that was just shared with you, with a child care preschool lens on the information. Then many of you have been dealing with, do I stay open? Do I close? Do I reopen? You know, how do I make that tough decision? And they've developed this wonderful risk-benefit assessment that will help you at least feel a little bit more confident about the decision that you're making. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Every program is different in what you're dealing with. And then lastly, it helps you explore your financial options through some tools that will help you work through that. Because again, we have to make this work financially. And the goal with those tools is to figure out if there are financial gaps and how do we fill them. Next slide, please. The guide will be available on, it was shared in the chat, and then we'll also give you the links to that so you can access it. So first, let's just talk for a minute about tuition strategies, your revenue. I want to just talk a little bit about some things that we know are working, some recommended practices. And many of you have already made decisions about charging families, not discounting. So just, I challenge you right now to be open and creative and to know that we may have to adjust what we're doing based on the information we have now and how things are changing. A lot of decisions were made a few weeks ago before we knew that we would be in quarantine till June 10th. So I think it would be okay to say, well, we might have to adjust. I want you all to try to capture as much revenue as possible. And with the spirit that we're hoping that you continue to pay staff, maybe there's reduced hours, but that we still have expenses that we're carrying as organizations, even if we've closed or we've reduced hours or parents aren't attending. So the recommendation is to try to have conversations with your customers, your families, to see if they can continue to pay, even if it's discounted. Again, you'll have to figure out what works best for you, but that some programs are even asking families to donate with the idea that we want to continue to be here when this is done at the end, that we still need your program in place, ready to do the important work of early care and education. We've found that communicating with families honestly and frequently has been hugely successful. Your families care about your teachers, they care about your program, they value, they respect what you're doing. And we know that those relationships are a two-way street. You know your families. Some families are working from home and still receiving income. And while their children may not be there, they still see the value in the service that you're providing, that they've purchased a spot in your program. Many of your teachers are still working tirelessly from their homes. I've seen just some of the most creative educational learning in our industry happening, on social media, and even in our leadership academies. Directors are sharing the really neat things that their teachers who are so passionate about the kids are still doing. Keep the learning happening as best as you can. And know that every situation with your families is going to be different. And right now, it's okay to do things by a case-by-case basis, based on what you know about their situation. Be creative. If you're getting inquiries, if you're still open for subsidy families, this might be a time where you're open to going through that process and becoming a subsidy vendor. We know that there's many school-aged children out there seeking care. Again, maybe you haven't done that before, but let's be open to it. Care for our essential workers. You heard Jenna talk about that as just such our number one priority right now, is that those children of essential workers are in safe, healthy, reliable, quality care. And that's really an important thing. If you have families that still need care and you're closed, let's try to refer them to programs that are open that meet that criteria. Next slide, please. And then we'll talk about the tool that can help you look at your cash flow. If there's financial gaps, we're going to have to get creative. You heard about the government loan programs. And so I want to talk about just a few minutes about maybe other options. Many programs are having success asking for donations. And this might be supplies, asking for supplies from your congregations, from your families, from your community, but also financial donations. There's many grants out there, and we're seeing them pop up every day. Many of the churches are offering grants to their preschools. There's all kinds of things out there. Be open, looking for them, and seeing if there's something that will be available to you. Our city economic development departments are also becoming a place to support businesses, including nonprofits, with being a source of local grant funding. So I would just check those websites periodically. And then lastly, I want to talk about a special loan program that is only for child care centers in the state of Virginia. It's funded through the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority. It's managed by them, and then it's funded by the Department of Social Services. This is an underutilized loan program, and it has a few special requirements, but I want you to just have it in your back pocket as an option. It's faith-based programs. Nonprofits are eligible for this loan program. You can borrow up to $150,000. They've lowered the interest rate right during this COVID-19 crisis to 0%. And you can defer for 6 months the payment. They've waived application fees. The only thing about this loan program is what you can use the money for. You can only use it to buy tangible items, things that you can touch and feel. So, and they have, a way that they manage that. Think of mulch, playground equipment, cribs, things like that you would purchase. And this could be another just part of your strategy. Next slide, please. managing expenses. Most organizations in this time have been looking at everywhere that they spend money and just really trying to pare it down. Your number one expense in this industry is our labor costs. I know I don't have to tell you all that, but I think this is a time where providers have to get really good at analyzing labor costs, using spreadsheets, and having tools that enable you to understand how much your labor costs cost you, what the expense looks like, and then feeding that into a bigger budget. Asking, for forgiveness of overhead expenses or asking for deferments is a recommended practice right now, and it's working for a lot of organizations. I think, we're so used to always trying to pay everything on time, pay our share, but this is a time where we're all working together to make it work. And so don't be afraid to ask if needed. If you have larger expenses, ask, try to negotiate. Next slide, please. And we mentioned cash flow projections as part of the knowledge guide that was developed. And I think that this is a really key piece to navigating this. As you look at all the options out there for financing, for loan programs, asking for donations, to all these things that we've been talking about, we have to kind of plug that into a cash flow projection, which is essentially a budget, but also it includes an extra element of that budget that says, well, how does this situation impact the bottom line, and which is our cash position. And by doing this, it will help you identify when your savings are going to run out, when you're going to run into a no cash position, and that's where you have to react quickly and fill the gap. So projecting out short-term and long-term, I think, is critical to your success right now. We've developed a cash flow tool. You may have one that you already use, and again, that'll be available on the website. When doing that, you're just thinking about the timing. Jody gave some good info of when you can expect the loan proceeds if you're applying for the EIDL grant or the PPP. And we got to start plugging that into when is that going to come in, so that, again, we know if there's going to be a situation where we don't have enough cash. You're doing that projections with, we're at a point now, we've been going at this for several weeks. We're starting to get a sense of what our, if we're open again, what our revenue, what our tuition is. We're getting a sense of what our expenses look like. So let's project those out and get through this time period financially. We're all just trying to stay in business right now. Next slide, please. And then kind of some next steps, some things just to think about. I've mentioned be creative, be innovative. What you've always done before, you might have to be open to doing it a little different. So parents might need just temporary childcare. We have a lot of parents now working from home realizing they cannot get their work done, so they may want some kind of creative situations right now. I mentioned caring for school-age kids. Be open. If you haven't done that before, there's support out there how to do that well. If you change your hours or you reopen, circle back to your insurance company and just make sure you're still covered. And then even though we're in this weird time where we're trying to navigate, June 10th will be here soon. And this is the time to get ready for summer, to get ready for the fall. And I want to encourage too, with this downtime, this is just a really good time to focus on administration and management and to get to those projects that you haven't ever had time to do because you're busy, to think about adding technology, adding automation, using social media robustly, using parent communication tools robustly to connect with your families. And then we've seen a lot of, I get a lot of calls from providers, and we have seen that the decision-making process, I think, for faith-based and nonprofits could maybe use just a little injection of best practices, and it's kind of identified. I'm trying to be positive. It's identified that maybe we don't always have the best systems in place to work together to make decisions. I want to mention a tool called the Staying on Course, the Early Childhood Board's Guide to Success, which gives lots of recommended best practices on how boards and how schools and their boards and the churches all work together to achieve this greater goal, which is high quality early care and education for children. So I mentioned that as another tool for you all. Next slide. And then we mentioned a resource website, earlyeducationbusiness.com. It's broken down into these links around the COVID-19 disaster, and we're working to update it as soon as we find information that pertains to Virginia Child Care Centers. So there's a resource for you. We will have all these webinars loaded on there as well. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you so much for all the great information. We do have a number of questions coming in. And I think that you mentioned a number of websites, Lauren, that folks are now asking for you to repeat. Could you just kind of review briefly the different websites that you've pointed folks to for different purposes?
If they go to earlyeducationbusiness.com, we've really worked hard to have that as a one-stop resource that will feed you to everything that you need. And I think it's pretty easy to navigate, but obviously we would love feedback on it.
Excellent. Thanks, Lauren. For loan programs, does the organization need to prove cash flow problems or need for the loan to make payroll?
You do need to demonstrate that COVID has impacted your operation. And so depending on which one, the EIDL loan, they're taking a look at 6 months operating expenses, your past operating expenses, to use that as the basis for your current loan amount. And in the PPP, they are looking at 12 months back. So yeah, the financial documents that you share with them will be historical. If you have current documents for 2020, they'll look at those as well. These programs are not intended to replace lost revenue, so you need to, it's intended to cover operating expenses and payroll.
That's helpful. Thank you, Jody. I think I'm going to also point up some of the questions that have come across, and then some of our experts have answered the questions, but I think many of them are going to be generally of interest. So Gary, I'm going to pitch a few to you that you have been hard at work in answering some of these. For example, what would happen with the loan in the case of an employee being impacted by COVID-19 and not able to return to work?
So as was just mentioned, the PPP loan, if we want to deal with that particularly as opposed to EIDL, but PPP loan, you have two basic questions. One is how much of the loan can I receive? And then the second is how much of that loan will be forgiven or considered a grant. So you have the ability to go out and get a loan that's based on 2.5 months of your average payroll. There's a lot of details to it, so I'll just summarize at a high level. And then at some point in the future, you will request forgiveness as much of that loan as possible. So if people have either stopped working, you've had to reduce hours, the impact is some of the loan that you receive that maybe you would have anticipated forgiveness on may not necessarily be forgiven. So it's generally speaking, people are trying to get as much as possible, organizations. And then the more payroll that you maintain, as has been mentioned a couple of times, this is about maintaining payroll in addition to utilities, rent, etc. Then that's how much would be forgiven. So there's not an easy answer to that, but those are the two general principles.
That's helpful. Thank you, Gary. And then we have a couple of questions around, is it allowable to take contributions as well as receive the loan?
Yeah, Kathy, this is Gary again. Yes, it is. As we were just talking about a second ago, depending on which loan you're looking at, on the PPP loan, which is what most people are focused on, there's not really a consideration about income impact. It's all about payroll. So your ability to go out and get donations and have revenue is not impacted by the bigger of the two loan programs, which is the PPP. There is an affirmation in the application that says the organization is being impacted. So the proper integrity and the proper approach to this is to say we have been impacted by this, but in terms of a direct measurement of where did revenues go now versus then, that's not a measurement. So by all means, pursue the revenue and donations for your organization, but the PPP is primarily about the payroll side.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Lots of questions, which I think, Gary, you've attempted to answer when folks say if they've applied, haven't heard anything, how do they check on their status? How long do they think it will take to hear back? Anything that you or Jody want to say about kind of what the wait may be, what steps could be taken as you're anxiously awaiting?
I can update on the PPP and what I know about EIDL. The EIDL, they were expecting, if loans were approved, that you would that would happen within 45 days. They were expecting a 21-day review process, and then an additional 14 days or something until you get the loans dispersed. So I would anticipate it's not going to be sooner than that, and it might be longer. So that's not very helpful, but at least it's not going to be before 45 days. The PPP, those loans are getting processed pretty quickly, and it's kind of a two-step process. The bank makes an internal approval, and then they submit the paperwork to get an SBA number, if you will. That's where the holdup is. Until they get an SBA number, they're not going to notify you that the loan has been 100% approved. But that is happening pretty quickly. It's about a week to 10 days, I think. And then the disbursement comes sometime after that. So one of the challenges that the lenders are having with PPP, though, is they have not been given complete guidance about how to record these loans on their books. And so smaller community-based banks are likely not going to disperse those dollars until they know how to account for them. And that's where some of the holdup is.
Great, thanks, Jody. Grace, there are a few questions related to unemployment. And there's one that is, since this is not up and running yet, will my employees be eligible for payment from the beginning of furlough?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it kind of depends on the program. For example, the new federal program, if you're excluded from state unemployment, that's going to be retroactive to January 27th. The state's going to have to make a decision about retroactivity for the state program. And the extra $600 a week that I talked about, that is not retroactive back to January 27th. That is only retroactive back to the date the state reached an agreement with the Department of Labor, which is a few days after March 27th when the new law was enacted. It all sounds complicated, and I understand it's probably overwhelming, but what I can tell you is everybody's working as fast as they can to put these pieces together to make sure, hey, you'll be able to say, I was laid off on this date, or my program closed on this date, or my hours were reduced on this date. But in some cases, at least on the federal piece of the base benefit, that will be retroactive. On the 600 weekly, know that it's only retroactive to, last week. It doesn't go back to January 27th, and that the state is making decisions now on how they're going to handle that state program. So it's a bit in flux, but we will get information to you as soon as some of these rules or decisions are made and clarified. And I would recommend checking that Virginia Employment Commission website for the latest information.
Excellent. And Becca, I think you found something fairly recently, maybe even while we've been on the call, about the VEC site.
Yes. It looks like the VEC site, it must have just been, the release is dated for yesterday. So it says that the benefits, so the $600 a month or week, $600 a week pandemic unemployment compensation benefits could be dispersed to people who are already receiving state unemployment benefits as early as next week. And then it lets folks know that they are in the process of getting the pandemic unemployment assistance pieces up and running. And that is the program for people who are not eligible for the typical state unemployment insurance, to include part-time workers and self-employed workers and others. One thing that the site makes very clear is that to be eligible for that new program, workers have to first apply for traditional unemployment. And the state will verify your eligibility under the kind of normal state UI program before they then consider you for the federal program. So there's some additional details on the VEC website, which I'm sure we can send around with the materials after the webinar.
Right. So I just will add to that. There is a notice up on the site, but it is a work in progress. So the state is trying to figure out, how do we comply with federal rules, which requires only the new federal program to apply to those that are excluded from the state program. And then how do we make that work? So it might require software changes, or it might require trying to figure out in a pragmatic way, what's the best way to do that. So I would just add that is, a work in progress, and they're trying to figure that out in the most pragmatic way possible.
Thanks to both of you. Here's a question. If you're reimbursing some of their payments to your family, so I assume that's tuition payments, can you ask for a reimbursement for this? I'm assuming the question may also be, is this, could this be part of the loans or applications that you make for relief funding?
It would not be, this is Gary, it would not be something that would be considered part of the loan forgiveness under the PPP or under EIDL, in terms of, as someone earlier said, it can't be considered to supplement lost revenues. So I think the answer, if I understand the question, refunding someone tuition would not be considered something that would forgive the loan.
Thank you, Gary. Lauren, a question for you. There have been several questions for a little bit more clarification about the staying the course. Where can you find that?
Okay, I put the name of the book in the chat box, or in the question, I think in the chat box. It's called Staying on Course, The Early Childhood Board's Guide to Success. And you can purchase that, I believe, on Kaplan. If you Google it, it will come up, but I think it's Kaplan or Red Leaf, like the early childhood publishers typically carry it.
Got it. Thank you. Jenna, I'm going to see if you are on and able to answer this question. Has there been any guidance provided on summer camps and whether the current 10 people per classroom or space will still be in place?
Thanks, Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so not at this time. I mean, for point of reference, the executive order stay at home is through June 10th. The governor noted the ability to ratchet that back if in fact things are better earlier in the Commonwealth. And that's really the root of the kind of the rule of 10 in terms of the executive order. So June 10th puts us squarely into early summer. And so I think there's a recognition that impacts that planning. From the Department of Education's perspective, as folks are thinking about summer programming, really encouraging people to kind of, sort of not expect to be able to kind of bring large groups together in June, knowing the current end date of the executive order. I think, there's a possibility of July and August, but, I think it would be prudent to, note that certainly the rule of 10 will exist through June, that we will, there'll be guidance out if there's flexibility given, but I would do contingency planning that would, kind of keep kids in smaller groups, noting that, we're likely to sort of thoughtfully come out of this, but, at least based on everything we've seen nationally, there's not a lot of good evidence that putting people immediately back in groups will do anything other than result in a second wave. So, again, the executive order is the sort of rule of the state on this. Right now, it goes through mid-June. And so I would strongly encourage folks to be thinking about the rule of 10 as it relates to planning for the summer.
Thanks, Jen. A couple more for you, which you may or may not be able to answer, but just wanted you to know these questions are being asked. What's going to happen when absences for children currently enrolled but not attending their early childhood programs run out?
That's a great question. So there's some flexibility now up to sort of an additional 40 days on top of the existing 36, which brings you to kind of a total of 76 for the year for kids that are on the child care subsidy program. As I think folks have noted, we've tried to be responsive, and so I think we came up with the best knowledge of the time. The thought is that 8 weeks would cover the need in terms of absences. I think as we reach the different stages and we feel like 8 weeks has passed, we'll be able to assess where we are as a Commonwealth and where we are in terms of additional stimulus dollars or other dollars for the block grant that funds those absences, and make a determination at that point in time. So we can't make a commitment beyond the 40 days right now, but we are continuing to evaluate what we're learning from the field, where the pain points are, and being thoughtful about how we can sort of both serve the sector and protect our most vulnerable kids and families who are served in the subsidy program.
Thanks, Jenna. And one more that I'll pitch to you first. I think it's just such an exceptional question. I'll see your answer, and then if our other speakers want to, take a swipe at this. I'm trying to determine whether there's a need to reopen. I'm having trouble finding out if there is a need. Is there?
That is a great question, and one where we're hearing that question asked across a lot of communities. And the answer looks different place by place. Even if you look at a map in terms of closures, a map in terms of where folks are a hotspot for COVID. And even beyond the maps, I think what I've heard when I've talked with directors and others in the field across the state is a lot of this hinges on parental preference, parental alternative options. And again, as Gary's and others have talked about, like even parental situations are changing by the day, if not the week. And so, it has been the most asked question, I'd say, of the last 3 weeks. My advice is, to focus locally. I think if you need to kind of have an understanding of what's available. Child Care Aware of Virginia is tracking kind of who's open, and you can go to that site or contact them. but more broadly, really encouraging folks to talk to your Smart Beginnings or United Way, talk to your early childhood person at your school division, reach out to your mayor or your board of supervisors or your county administrator, trying to just kind of touch base and say, is there any need? Am I missing anything? We are seeing in the Commonwealth and in Virginia, there are places that are opening and not serving as many kids as they thought. On the other hand, I was speaking with the chief of staff to the governor, and he's saying, they're getting a lot of emails saying that people are desperate for childcare, and so, that matching, right, almost this sort of this matching up of kind of need and supply is so tricky right now in a constantly changing landscape. And so I think kind of old-fashioned getting on the phone, making a handful of phone calls to folks in your community is probably the best way. And then I think if you think there is a need, whether it's after you talk with your the Walmart manager or the city manager or somebody at your local hospital, HR at your local hospital, then thinking about really targeted outreach, because I know that it's going to take sort of two things, one of which is a space where kids can be served, and two, as you all know so well, it's so much of it is about parental or guardian trust, right? And so I think when folks just see an ad on TV or on a billboard, much less likely to trust that than if their HR director says, hey, here's a new program, we've talked to this person, he or she is really committed to kind of running a safe, clean environment, and they'll take care of your child. It just goes a really long way in this industry. That's my best kind of guess at an answer, Kathy. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Jenna. We are coming close to the close of the webinar, and I think we probably have more questions than we have answers at this point. But I think that the information that the terrific speakers were able to give did seem to bring some great information and resources for the individuals on the call who are asking these terrific questions. And as we close, our last slide will show a couple of websites and resources where you could go to get some additional information about where to go from here. We'll continue to update frequently asked questions and provide these webinars and opportunities to stay connected. Also watch our social media, the Facebook page for the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, and we'll try to keep people connected as additional answers come forward. Want to thank all of our attendees as well as our wonderful speakers today, and I'll turn it to Gary to conclude our session today.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to everyone who participated as a panelist today. And this is truly a collaborative effort with public, not-for-profit, and private. I'm appreciative of the work of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. Kathy, thank you for your leadership, and Jenna Conway for your leadership, and pass along our thanks to the governor and the administration as well. And of course, I want to thank all of the not-for-profit and faith-based providers who are on this call. You all are amazing, and I know this is an extraordinarily difficult time. But the critical role that you're playing both in early childhood and now in our economic situation, as well as just the overall state of affairs, is really critical to us. I've benefited both in my family and personally from faith-based education, so I really appreciate the complexities of what a lot of you are dealing with, both at faith-based and in not-for-profit. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, Lauren Small made a mention that we were providing to this group an army of consultants. And while she didn't use that phrase today, I thought it was very appropriate that you all have a lot of information now and hopefully a lot of contact points, as our desire is to help you in any way that we can. There is certainly no playbook for what any of you are going through right now. Just a few weeks ago, many of us, I know Jenna and Kathy and I and others, were celebrating all the great progress that we had made in early childhood and all the things that had just come through the administration and through the legislative process. And we were very, very, very excited. It's hard to believe that only a few weeks later, we're focused in more of a survival mode. So understand that whatever your questions are, whatever frustrations and anxieties you're feeling, no one has all the answers, but I do know that you have a lot of people on this call, including myself, who want to be part of your solution, and maybe making your rest a little easier in the evening with these things. So If your questions didn't get answered today, we certainly want to be able to follow up. The resources that are mentioned and being displayed right now and the other presenters have shown to you will be available and made easily accessible to you. I think this is one of those times where you can say on one hand, I need to hurry up, and on the other hand, take it slow. And both of those answers can be right, just based on your particular situation, the type of support that you need, the type of financial resources that you need. So please don't hesitate if you feel like a question's too simple or you just need someone to run something by to let us know how we can help. No matter what your size, what your current feelings about things, please know that we understand the issues you're against and we want to be as helpful as we can be. We're so proud of you and are eager to see you be successful as you go through this unprecedented time. And we look forward to brighter days ahead. Keep a smile on your face and take a deep breath. And we look forward to further assisting you in the future. Thanks for being on the call today.